Fire Pro Wrestling Returns, released in 2007 for the Sony PlayStation 2 and one of many games in the long-running Fire Pro Wrestling series, yet only the third game in the series to grace North American soil, following 2 portable entries for the Game Boy Advance. And on top of that, it was originally a budget title, so it was fairly cheap at the time, and certainly a less complicated means of sampling a bit of that Fire Pro pie that was, until that point, only accessible to Japanese audiences, importers with plenty of disposable income, and tech-savvy ROM rippers with plenty of disposable time on their hands. Now, if you're familiar with Fire Pro Wrestling, if you're a fan of Fire Pro Wrestling, if you worship the altar that Fire Pro Wrestling has built, stop watching this video because you're not getting anything here you don't already know. For those who have never heard of Fire Pro, it is a long-running series of Japanese-only wrestling video games dating back to 1989, with the first release being Fire Pro Wrestling Combination Tag for the PC Engine. Despite not being available to local markets not called Japan, it's gotten quite a bit of a following and a reputation of sorts to the point where people have erected shrines and temples dedicated to a series of games that wasn't legally available in their terrain until recent years. And this concludes the so-called history lesson. Let's move on to the actual game, shall we? In case the game's title isn't blatant enough of a descriptor as to its content, Fire Pro Wrestling Returns is a wrestling game where 2 guys in underwear exchange strikes and grapple each other in the middle of the ring. Anyone with even the most base knowledge of the form should understand what's going on. You fight the other guy, you use strikes and grapples to weaken him to a point where you can score either a pinfall or submission victory. Sometimes you can knock your opponent out for the win, sometimes you'll win via countout. It typically depends on the match, of which there are quite a few variations. Your standard wrestling matches, your tag matches, your cage matches, your barbed wire with explosives, and there's even an MMA style octagon for the shoot fighters in the game if you're so inclined to go that route. Fire Pro's control and overall gameplay takes a bit of learning since the whole thing's based more on timing and some semblance of strategy over the typical button mashing and playing to the crowd to boost some unseen meter, but it's hardly a complicated affair. You have 3 attack buttons of varying strength, and pressing these alone, or with a direction, executes your basic strikes. When both wrestlers close in, they'll automatically grapple, and from there you use the strike buttons with a direction to execute more advanced grapple moves. There's a certain logic you have to follow here in which you start off using weak moves before moving on to the heavy hitters. Trying to hit a big move early will only see your efforts countered and your chances at victory dwindled. For the most part, it shouldn't take long for you to get a grasp of the controls, as they tend to be easy to figure out rather quickly. The AI, however, is a bit of a bastard and makes things a bit difficult at first, even on the easiest of settings. Learning to time your attacks as well as the proper approach to playing a match are perhaps the bigger hurdles in Fire Pro, and chances are it'll take a good while for you to truly feel like you're making progress. Don't expect to win your first match in unless you're playing the MMA style matches. Those are actually easier to play and win. Once you get a feel for the controls, it won't be long before you eventually get good enough to start winning matches and attaining some semblance of glory that means nothing because there's no long-term career mode to be found here. Getting used to the core gameplay is essential to success in Fire Pro Returns, but then the core gameplay is but a minute aspect in the game's expansive package. Starting with the roster on its own, you're given an astounding 300 plus wrestlers to choose from, most of them based on Japanese wrestlers, but you'll find some familiar local talent as well, albeit under different non-infringing names, but you'll recognize some of them rather easily if you bear any familiarity with the wrestling. However, if playing with those folks mean nothing to you, you can create your own ring warriors, and this is where Fire Pro truly shines. Its expansive customization and attention to detail. Anything and everything within the game is open to modification or creation. Want to recreate a popular wrestling superstar or create your own imaginary grappler? Go nuts. Create your own referees to officiate your matches? Go nuts. Build a promotion from scratch complete with your own logos and title belts? Have fun. The level of detail and the level of customization that you have in the edit mode of Fire Pro goes so deep and so far that trying to dig through all the available options and parameters would be a tall order. And while the options don't allow you to go full out crazy with the character designs, no superhero recreations or anything within the realm of the weird, There are so many little details to cover in regards to appearance, costume, movesets, attributes, behaviors, and whatnots that you'll likely spend more time creating these characters than actually playing them. Or you could just find a save file out there that has all the work done for you and just be done with it. That kind of works too. If there is but a minor quibble to be had with Fire Pro Returns, not necessarily on my part, I could care less in all honesty, but something worth bringing up I suppose. It's that for all the customizable aspects and all the expansive capabilities that Fire Pro provides, what it doesn't provide is any semblance of a career mode or a season mode or any long-term mode like that where there's a narrative. Yes, there are things like round-robin tournaments and league tournaments and things of that nature, and there's title matches that you could have with your created titles, but they're no real substitute for a dedicated mode where you take your wrestler through the ranks of some promotion or multiple promotions or whatever the case may be. Sometimes they have like a narrative of some sort. I don't know how you would make that work in a Fire Pro game because that world's always changing, but some people apparently care for that sort of thing, I guess. And I suppose the lack of such a narrative would be somewhat of a turnoff. But for someone like me who just prefers to play the wrestling matches and not have to sit through cutscenes filled with bad voice acting or even shittier storytelling, look, I'm the guy who buys a WWE game and finds a save file with everything unlocked, or I just download the accelerator thing because I just want to play the universe mode and just have fun with that. So the lack of any dedicated career or season mode does not bother me in the slightest. There's really no point anyways, there's nothing to unlock, everything is created from the get-go and the world's always changing, so I don't know how that would work. But there are some folks who care for that sort of thing, and if you do, you won't find it here because Fire Pro Returns doesn't have something like that. It's just straight wrestling, make your own shit up and have fun with it, and you know what, that's just the way I like it. Fire Pro Returns uses 2D sprites over 3D rendered stuff, which might seem like an odd sight off-putting to some. Look, I've seen it happen. A couple years ago I tried getting a couple folks to try Fire Pro Wrestling, and the biggest complaint some of them had was not the gameplay, it was the quote-unquote Nintendo graphics of the wrestlers over the somewhat nice-looking ring. Fucking bullshit and all that jazz and whatever the case may be. And they just wanted to play SmackDown instead. On first glance, I couldn't really blame them. You had these nice looking arenas and rings and entrances rendered in 3D, and then out walks these flat looking wrestlers that animate rather poorly to the point you'd swear there was more animation in pro wrestling on the NES. This was the thing I was told, honest. Now, quips aside, the wrestlers do look fairly decent, at least as decent as you could make them out to be when you build the bastards. They've got quite a bit of size to them, they move smoothly despite lacking in the frames. I like the zoom effect whenever things get a bit distant, and while the entrances are an oddity, the ring itself looks decent, whether it's the standard ring, the cage, or whatever the case may be. The speed's pretty consistent with virtually no slowdown to be had, so that's fine. It's an otherwise fine looking game if you could overlook the visual aspect of it. This being a Japanese-developed game and initially based on Japanese wrestling promotions for the most part, expect the soundtrack of Fire Pro Wrestling Returns to contain a lot of cheesy Japanese-sounding pop-rock music genre generic tunes bits. The same kind of tunes you'd probably get from the older N64 wrestling titles from Aki. Sorry, that's the most apt comparison I've got. Now, your mileage may vary when it comes to the musical bits, but I personally found the tunes to be a bit bland in the background. They're not unpleasant, but they're nothing special either. They're just there, filling space and keeping the audio somewhat interesting and only moderately succeeding. Some will find the music here to be good musical content. I'm rather ambivalent, but again, your mileage may vary. Sound effects are alright, they sound like wrestling sounds, they're somewhat crisp and clear, the tones and beeps of the menus kind of irritate me, but again, your mileage may vary. My overall exposure to the Fire Pro Wrestling series has been extremely limited. Beyond some readings online, I've never actually tried the series out firsthand, so come 2007 and the budget price, Fire Pro Wrestling Returns was my first foray into the Fire Pro series. And I could say with absolute certainty that outside of the brief sampling of the GBA title I picked up a few years later, it'll be my only real sampling of the series overall. Not because I dislike the game, but rather because the way I see it, Fire Pro Wrestling Returns is pretty much the total package on one convenient PlayStation 2 disc. It has that slick, impeccable gameplay that takes a bit of learning to nail the intricacies, but ultimately feels gratifying when you do. It has hundreds of wrestlers to choose from, and many more slots to recreate big names or create your own wrestling legends. The match types, while nowhere near as gimmicky as the mainstream titles, are still plentiful, There are a lot of game modes, the creation tools and the depth contained within is horrifyingly deep that it may take a good while to blow through everything. If you're willing to overlook the odd visual aesthetic of 2D wrestlers with over 3D arenas, and are willing to learn the intricacies of the core gameplay for however long it takes, there's plenty to like about Fire Pro Wrestling Returns. A lot of people swear by the series, and it may not be everyone's cup of joe, but this is one fine wrestling title nonetheless. The best wrestling game ever made? No way am I making that bold of claim here, but this is still bloody good stuff.